The cold wind swept across the high towers of Arendor, carrying with it the scent of frost and distant pine forests. In the heart of the northern kingdom, the castle of King Varian rose like a frozen mountain, its walls carved from black stone and silver ice. Inside, the grand halls glittered with crystal chandeliers, banners of the royal crest swaying gently in the draught. But amidst all the beauty and grandeur, there was one presence that seemed untouched by warmth: Princess Lyra. Lyra was unlike any other princess in the kingdom. She had never spoken a word, not because she could not, but because the world had always felt too loud, too demanding, and too cruel. Silence had become her shield, her armor, and sometimes her prison. Her pale eyes, as blue as the frozen lake beneath the castle, often stared through the world rather than at it. Courtiers whispered about her. Soldiers avoided her. And even her father, King Varian, kept a careful distance, unsure how to guide a daughter who seemed both fragile and untouchable. The princess moved through the hallways with quiet grace, her black velvet gown brushing the cold marble floor. The courtiers murmured behind her, afraid to meet her gaze, yet drawn to her in a strange, reverent way. They called her the Silent Shadow. For wherever she went, the air seemed to still, and even the fire in the torches flickered as if in awe. It was the day of the winter festival, a rare event when the bitter northern kingdom celebrated the brief sunlight that touched their land. Nobles from distant realms arrived in gilded carriages, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. The great hall was alive with music, voices, and the scent of roasted meats. But Lyra did not notice the festival. Her eyes wandered toward the large, arched windows, watching the snow fall in endless sheets, each flake sparkling like a tiny star. That was when she noticed him. Kale was not from the court. He was an outsider, an Omega from a distant land, whose presence in Arendor had been tolerated but not welcomed. He moved through the hall with a quiet confidence, different from the nobles who bowed and preened for attention. His eyes were warm, brown with flecks of gold, and they seemed to hold stories of countless roads traveled, battles faced, and a life lived beyond the walls of kings and queens. But what caught Lyra's attention most was the way he looked at her, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Kale paused at the edge of the hall, noticing the silent princess standing apart from the crowd. He knelt slightly, bowing not to the crown or the court, but to her, and then, with careful, deliberate gestures, he signed, "I see you." The words, though unspoken, carried weight. Lyra's heart, so long accustomed to quiet, skipped a beat. Her hands froze, her lips trembled, and for a brief moment, the coldness around her seemed to melt. No one in the hall could understand what had just passed between them. The nobles gasped at his audacity. The king's eyes narrowed like ice. But Lyra knew, in that instant, that someone had finally looked beyond her silence and truly seen her. After the festival, the halls returned to their usual hush. Lyra found herself drawn to the high tower where Kale had been, though she did not yet know why. The snow outside glimmered in the moonlight, and the shadows of the castle seemed longer and deeper than before. She imagined Kale walking through the corridors, moving with purpose, unafraid of walls or whispers. In her silence, she reached out, not physically, but in thought, in feeling. A bond had been sparked, fragile but real. Kale, meanwhile, had not come to Arendor merely as a traveler. He had heard of the silent princess, of the rumors surrounding her family, and of the ancient curse whispered in the northern forests. Many said that a princess born silent would either bring great fortune or terrible ruin to her kingdom. Kale did not fear curses. He only feared ignorance, the kind that told him not to reach out, not to care, not to see. The next day, Kale returned to the castle under the pretense of offering his services as an Omega envoy. King Varian, though wary, allowed him to stay, for he sensed no threat in Kale's calm demeanor. But the king did not understand that Kale's real mission was not political, it was personal. He wanted to reach Lyra, to break through the walls of silence that had protected and imprisoned her. In the gardens of the palace, where the snow lay thick and the branches of trees bent under its weight, Lyra and Kale met again. The world was quiet here, except for the soft crunch of their footsteps on frozen ground. Kale knelt once more, his hands moving with patience and care as he signed. "I am Kale. I see you. I am here." Lyra's pale fingers trembled as she tried to respond. For years, she had only known silence. And yet, somehow, she understood him. She formed a hesitant sign, one she had never used before. "I understand." The act was simple, yet revolutionary. Kyle smiled. A warm, gentle light in the cold gray of the garden. He knew the walls around her were strong, but every stone had a crack, and he had found the first one. But even as they shared this quiet moment, shadows lingered. King Varian had noticed Lyra's absence and Kale's boldness. He was a man of power, accustomed to control, and he could not ignore a stranger bending rules and touching the heart of his daughter. Meanwhile, whispers of dissent traveled through the castle. Nobles feared the bond forming between Princess and Omega, worried it might upset the balance of the kingdom. As evening fell, the sky painted in deep violet and silver. Lyra returned to her tower, her heart racing in ways she could not yet name. She looked out over the frozen lands and thought of Kale's words. "I see you." For the first time, she felt that perhaps silence was not her prison, but a place from which she could rise. Below, Kale watched her from the courtyard, his own thoughts tangled with hope and caution. He had seen many kingdoms, many rulers, and many silent hearts, but none like Lyra. She was both fragile and fierce, and he knew that reaching her would not be easy. Yet he also knew that some connections could not be ignored. Some bonds demanded courage, patience, and a willingness to defy the world. That night, the castle seemed to hold its breath. The firelight flickered across the walls, shadows dancing like restless spirits. Lyra lay in her chamber, staring at the ceiling, imagining hands forming words in the air, gestures filled with meaning. For the first time, she imagined herself speaking, not with her lips, but with her soul. And far below, in the courtyard, Kale made a silent vow. No matter the obstacles, no matter the anger of kings or the fear of nobles, he would help the silent princess find her voice. He would show her that being seen was sometimes more powerful than any spoken word. The wind howled outside the tower, carrying the promise of snow and storm. Somewhere in the icy halls of Arendor, a shadow moved, restless and aware. The world had changed, even if the king did not yet know it. Lyra's silence was no longer empty. It was the beginning of something dangerous, beautiful, and utterly unpredictable. And in the quiet, where snow met stone, Lyra signed once more to herself, though no one could see. "I see you too." It was a whisper to the world, a challenge to fate, and the first step toward a story that would not remain silent for long. The frost clung to the palace walls like a frozen veil, and the northern wind carried whispers of secrets long kept. In the quiet of the royal gardens, Lyra moved carefully along the snow-dusted paths. The trees stood bare, their branches sharp against the gray sky. Yet the place was peaceful in its frozen stillness. Here, she could breathe without the weight of the court pressing upon her. Here, Kale waited. Kale had not come as a guest or a stranger. He had chosen to be where Lyra could reach him, where her silence could be met not with fear or pity, but with understanding. When he saw her, his eyes lit with a warmth that even the harsh cold could not diminish. "Good evening, Princess," Kale signed carefully, his movements precise yet gentle. His hands were steady, and his eyes searched hers as though he could read the thoughts behind her silence. Lyra's lips trembled, a response unspoken, as she signed back slowly. I was hoping you would come." The garden held its breath, silent except for the crunch of their steps in the snow. Kale moved closer, careful not to disturb the delicate frost on the branches. "I promised I would," he signed, and a soft smile curved his lips. "I will always come." It was the first time Lyra felt a spark of hope in months. Her days in the palace had been long and empty, filled with the echoes of etiquette and the cold judgment of those who did not understand her. But here, with Kale, she could be more than a princess or a symbol. she could simply be herself. Over the next few days, their meetings became more frequent, though always in secrecy. The palace, vast and silent in its frozen grandeur, provided many hidden corners. The frost-covered stables, the shadowed halls behind the kitchens, and the abandoned towers where wind sang through broken windows. In these places, Kyle and Lyra communicated in gestures, signs, and subtle expressions. Every smile, every flick of a finger, every glance held a world of meaning. Lyra's confidence grew slowly. She learned to form small signs to express her thoughts, joy, curiosity, even frustration. Kale responded with patience, never rushing her, never forcing words where none could exist. He spoke to her with eyes, with hands, with the quiet strength of someone who saw her not as silent, but as powerful in her own way. Yet their connection was dangerous. King Varian, a man of iron will and relentless pride, began to sense a change in his daughter. He noticed her lingering in places she had never lingered before. Her eyes softer, her movements lighter. Rumors reached the court nobles whispering about the foreign Omega who dared approach the silent princess. Some saw Kale as a threat. Others, a curiosity. None understood the depth of what was forming between him and Lyra. One evening, Kale took Lyra to the highest tower, where the wind roared and snow spun in wild patterns around them. The view stretched across the frozen kingdom. Mountains like jagged teeth, rivers locked in ice, forests dark and endless. Lyra's eyes shone with wonder, and for the first time, she signed words with both speed and confidence. "It is beautiful," Kale nodded, signing back. "And you are part of it. You belong here, but not like a shadow. Like the light that touches the snow." Lyra felt a strange warmth in her chest, a flutter she could not name. She had always believed her silence separated her from the world. But now, with Kale, it felt as if her voice had been waiting all along, hidden, silent, but alive. Despite the growing bond, shadows lingered. The castle, ancient and proud, held more than stone and snow. Whispers of old magic threaded through the walls, the echoes of a curse that had haunted Lyra's family for generations. It was said that the daughters of the Alpha line carried the weight of silence for a reason, and those who disturbed it risked awakening forces that were older than the kingdom itself. One night, while walking through the empty hallways, Lyra noticed the shadows stretching longer than usual. They seemed to twist and curl toward her, moving with intent. She stopped, heart pounding, and looked at Kale. He followed her gaze, his expression grave. "It feels different tonight," Lyra signed, her fingers trembling. Kale nodded slowly, stepping closer. "Something stirs," he signed back. "Old magic. Something that watches, waiting." The fear in his eyes made Lyra's pulse quicken. She had never felt fear like this, not from the world, nor from people, but from something unseen, something ancient and hungry. And yet, with Kale beside her, the fear was tempered by courage. As the days passed, their connection deepened, even as the tension at court grew. King Varian summoned Kale to the hall one morning, his presence like a storm. The Alpha King's voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the stone chambers. "You have been near my daughter," he said, his gaze sharp as icicles. "Do you understand what you risk by being here?" Kale bowed his head respectfully, though his eyes did not waver. "I mean no harm, Your Majesty," he said. "I only wish to understand her, to see her as she truly is." King Varian's lips tightened. He had spent years teaching Lyra the rules of power, the weight of her position, and the dangers of weakness. And yet here was a stranger, an Omega, bending those rules with nothing but patience and respect. His anger simmered, but beneath it was something he did not fully recognize: curiosity. Meanwhile, Lyra learned to trust Kale in ways she had never trusted anyone. She showed him the hidden corners of the palace, the places she had carved for herself in silence. She signed stories of her childhood, of her loneliness, and of the secret hopes she had kept even from her father. Kale listened, always attentive, never judgmental, his presence steady like the walls of the castle around them. But the outside world would not wait. One afternoon, as Lyra and Cale met in the frost-covered gardens, a sudden chill swept over the courtyard. The air seemed heavier, and the snow swirled in strange patterns, as if alive. Lyra's eyes widened, and she signed quickly, "Something is coming." Cale's expression darkened. "The curse," he signed back, his hands moving with urgency. "It feels close. It knows you are awakening, and it will not be ignored." The wind picked up, and shadows lengthened, twisting toward them. For a moment, the garden felt like a different world. One where the snow and ice were only a veil over something older, darker, and more dangerous. Lyra shivered, but she did not step back. She looked at Cale and signed, "I trust you." Cale took her hands in his, warmth meeting cold, and signed back, "And I you, always." The castle bell tolled in the distance, a reminder that the world outside their secret corner was still alive, still watching, still waiting. And in that moment, Lyra realized something profound. Her silence had protected her, but it had also isolated her. With Cale, she could be both safe and seen. She could begin to break free from the walls that had confined her. As night fell, the shadows in the gardens began to move differently. They stretched toward Lyra and Cale, whispering with voices only the heart could hear. The air hummed with magic, old and restless, a reminder that the past and the present were intertwined in ways neither of them fully understood. Lyra looked at Cale, fear and determination mixed in her eyes. "We must face it," she signed. Cale nodded, his expression steady. "Together," he signed back. The snow swirled around them, a silent storm of white and gray, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. The bond between Princess and Omega was no longer simple curiosity or forbidden friendship. It had become a quiet defiance, a spark of life in the cold, a force that the shadows could not easily ignore. And far above, in the highest tower, King Varian watched from his window. His daughter's courage and the Omega's presence disturbed him in ways he could not name. The walls he had built to protect her seemed suddenly fragile, and he sensed that the balance of his kingdom and perhaps his own power might be shifting. That night, Lyra lay in her chamber, hands clasped over her chest, feeling the warmth of trust, connection, and newfound courage. The shadows outside pressed against the windows, but she did not flinch. For the first time, she felt ready to face what was coming, knowing that Cale would be by her side. And in the cold silence of the palace, the wind whispered, "The awakening has begun." The morning sun barely pierced the frozen clouds above Arendor, casting long silver shadows across the black stone of the castle. Inside, the halls were quiet, yet tension hung in the air like fog. Word of Princess Lyra's secret meetings with Cale had begun to spread, carried by whispers that crawled through the corridors and echoed in the grand chambers. Though no one dared speak openly, the court's unease was palpable. King Varian sat upon his high throne, his fingers steepled as he watched the hall below. He was a man of power, stern and unyielding. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty gnawed at him. His daughter, the silent princess, had begun to show signs of life beyond his control. She smiled at strangers, lingered in the gardens, and sometimes, late at night, would stare into the shadows as if she could speak to them without words. Cale, the Omega from a distant land, had grown bolder. He no longer limited their meetings to hidden corners of the castle. He began appearing in the halls at times when the courtiers would not notice, his hands forming careful signs that only Lyra could understand. "I am here. You are safe." These messages, simple and pure, carried more power than any spoken word, but the bond between them did not go unnoticed for long. A few nobles, envious and suspicious, began to murmur of danger. They feared the influence Cale might have over the princess, fearing it could disrupt the delicate balance of power in Arendor. Some even went so far as to speak to King Varian, hinting at the Omega's audacity and the princess's boldness. "Father," Lyra signed one afternoon as she entered the great hall, "may I speak with you?" Her hands moved slowly, carefully, as though the very act of communication carried weight. King Varian looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You have been restless, Lyra," he said aloud, his voice deep and controlled. "And I hear you have a companion, an outsider. What is this?" Lyra's fingers hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything to explain Cale's kindness, his patience, his understanding, but she also feared anger and rejection. Instead, she formed the simplest sign she could. "He means no harm." The king's eyes narrowed. "No harm? You place trust in a stranger over your family, over your kingdom?" His voice rose slightly, sharp as the northern wind. "I will not allow it. You will cease these meetings at once." Lyra's heart sank, but Cale's presence in her mind steadied her. She had learned, in the days since they met, that courage did not always roar. Sometimes, courage was quiet, patient, and unyielding. She signed softly, "I cannot. I trust him." Varian's jaw tightened, and he rose from his throne. "Then you leave me no choice." His voice was iron, but a trace of doubt lingered in his eyes. "You will remain under my watch. No one enters your chambers but your guards. And as for the Omega—" He paused, the weight of his words heavy. "He leaves the kingdom at sunrise." That night, Lyra and Cale met in the hidden garden beneath the silver moon. The air was sharp, with frost, and their breaths rose in misty clouds. Lyra's hands trembled as she signed quickly, "Father knows." Cale's eyes darkened, but he reached for her hands, holding them firmly yet gently. "We will face this together," he signed. "We must trust ourselves." They did not notice the shadows moving beyond the garden walls. Long, twisting forms that seemed neither entirely solid nor entirely void, gliding silently over snow and stone. The old magic, ancient and patient, had sensed Lyra's awakening. It had watched her, feeding on the emptiness of her silence for years. And now, with Cale by her side, it stirred with anger and hunger. Over the next days, the palace became a stage of tension and intrigue. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, and even the guards began to notice unusual occurrences, torches flickering when no wind blew, doors that slammed without cause, and strange echoes of a child's laughter in empty corridors. Lyra, though frightened, found her courage growing. Cale taught her to channel the fear into strength, to move carefully, and to trust the signs she formed. One evening, as Lyra walked through the northern wing of the castle, she felt a presence behind her. Turning quickly, she saw only shadows twisting along the walls. A cold, unnatural chill ran down her spine. She signed urgently to Cale. "Something is near." Cale appeared almost instantly, his eyes scanning the hall. "The curse," he signed, his hands moving quickly. "It knows. It comes for you. We must be ready." The shadows did not wait. A dark figure, taller than any man, cloaked in shifting smoke, emerged from the hall's darkness. Its eyes glowed faintly, red and alive, as it glided toward them. Lyra's heart pounded. But she did not step back. She formed a sign she had never used before. Trembling but determined, "I am not afraid." Cale placed his hands over hers, steadying them. "You are strong. We face it together." The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through frozen trees. It lunged, and the air around them grew heavy, thick with the scent of old magic. Lyra felt an unfamiliar energy stirring within her, a warmth that seemed to come from her chest and spread outward. She signed desperately, "Go, away," and for a moment, the shadow recoiled, as if her voice, silent yet powerful, had struck it. Cale's eyes widened with recognition. "It is your gift," he signed. "You are stronger than you know. Your silence was never empty." The shadow did not vanish, but it paused, hovering at the edge of the hall. It waited, patient and hungry, knowing that the princess's awakening had only just begun. Meanwhile, King Varian, sensing something amiss in the castle, stormed through the corridors. His pride, his anger, and his fear battled within him. Seeing Cale standing near Lyra, his daughter's hands moving in urgent signs. His chest tightened with both fury and confusion. He wanted to scold, to punish, to regain control. Yet, a small, reluctant part of him wondered if he had underestimated her. That night, Lyra lay awake in her chamber, her hands resting over her chest. The warmth of Cale's presence lingered even after he had left. She thought of the shadow, of the cold, and of the fear she had faced, and yet she felt alive in a way she never had before. Silence had been her shield, but now it was becoming a source of power, something she could wield with Cale beside her. Far below, in the halls of the castle, Cale made his own silent vow. He had faced many dangers, traveled many lands, and seen much cruelty, but nothing had prepared him for this, a princess who spoke in silence, a kingdom bound by pride and fear, and a shadow older than the mountains themselves. He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but he would not leave her side. Not now, not ever. And in the frozen forests surrounding Arendor, the ancient darkness watched. It had waited for years, fed on silence and fear. And now it would move. The kingdom's peace, the court's balance, and even the bond between father and daughter hung in delicate tension. The princess's awakening had begun, and the shadows would not forgive. Lyra signed one last message to herself before closing her eyes. I will not hide. I will be seen. The cold wind howled outside, carrying with it the echo of old magic, the promise of danger, and the certainty that the silent princess and her Omega were no longer alone. The curse was awakening, and the real test of courage, love, and power had only just begun. The first light of dawn crept over the frozen mountains of Arendor, painting the black stone of the castle with soft hues of silver and pale gold. Inside, the halls were quiet, but the stillness was tense, charged with anticipation. For weeks, the shadows had lingered, whispering through corridors and frost-covered gardens, testing the limits of the kingdom, the princess, and her Omega companion. Today, the waiting would end. Lyra stood at the highest tower, wrapped in a cloak of deep blue velvet. Her pale eyes, bright and determined, scanned the snow-covered lands below. She felt the stir of power within her, a strength awakened by her silence, her courage, and the bond she had formed with Cale. He stood beside her, calm yet alert, his hands ready to guide and protect her if needed. The shadow comes, Cale signed, his voice silent but full of urgency. His eyes never left hers. Lyra nodded, her own hands moving with confidence. I am ready. The words were simple, but their meaning carried centuries of expectation, fear, and hope. She had been silent for so long, yet in her heart, she understood that this moment would define not only her life, but the fate of the kingdom. The castle doors trembled as the shadow moved closer. It was no longer a simple wisp of darkness. It had taken form, a towering figure of smoke and cold light, its presence bending the air and freezing the very walls of the castle. Red glimmers burned within its depths, reflecting centuries of anger and hunger. Cale reached for her hand, his warmth grounding her. You are not alone. We face it together, he signed. Lyra drew a deep breath, feeling the energy of the palace and the land flowing into her. She raised her hands, forming the signs she had learned in secret. Gestures that spoke louder than words. Begone! You will not claim me or this kingdom. For a moment, the shadow paused, as if confused by the strength of her defiance. The cold around them seemed to crack, tiny fractures of warmth breaking through. Cale added his own strength to hers, moving his hands to mirror hers, their combined energy creating a silent but powerful barrier. The shadow surged forward, attempting to overwhelm them, and the hall trembled with its force. Lyra did not falter. She remembered every moment of fear, every moment of loneliness, every time she had thought silence made her weak. Now she knew it had made her strong. Her hands moved in signs that were no longer hesitant but commanding, weaving ancient words of power she had only just begun to understand. The shadow hissed and writhed, its smoke twisting into sharp tendrils, but the bond between Lyra and Cale held. Their eyes met, And in that silent connection, they found courage beyond fear. Every unspoken word, every gesture of trust, became a weapon against the darkness. King Varian, watching from the throne room below, felt a stir of awe and fear. His daughter, whom he had long considered fragile, was standing against forces older than the kingdom itself. He had underestimated her. And yet, he also realized that the presence of Kale, the Omega he had once scorned, was essential to this moment. Together, they formed a unity that no single force could break. The shadow screamed, a soundless roar that rattled windows and sent flurries of snow through the halls. Lyra's hands moved faster, more decisively, her signs weaving a pattern of power that even the oldest magic could not ignore. She felt the energy within her expand, warm and alive, pushing back the cold darkness inch by inch. And then, with a final, defiant motion, she formed a sign she had never dared to use aloud. "I see you, and I am not afraid." The words, though silent to most ears, carried power beyond comprehension. The shadow shivered, twisting violently. And then, as if recognizing the truth in her voice, it recoiled. Light began to fracture through its form, red glimmers fading into nothingness, until at last, with a gust of wind and a ripple of snow, the darkness dissolved entirely. Kale exhaled deeply, releasing her hands and letting the warmth of the moment sink in. Lyra's chest rose and fell with the rhythm of triumph and relief. For the first time in her life, she felt not only seen but truly powerful. The castle, which had held its breath for so long, seemed to exhale as well. Torches burned brighter. Walls gleamed in the morning light. And the cold that had weighed so heavily on the kingdom began to lift. Lyra looked at Kale, her eyes shining with emotion. She signed softly, "We did it. Together." Kale smiled, a quiet light in his eyes. "Always together," he signed back. Later that day, King Varian ascended the tower to see his daughter. He approached with a measured pace, his face unreadable. Lyra stood tall, no longer the silent shadow, but a young woman who had faced darkness and prevailed. You faced it," Varian said, his voice softer than usual. "And you were not alone. You—" He paused, as if searching for words. "You are stronger than I imagined." Lyra signed carefully, with grace and respect. "Father, thank you." Varian's eyes softened, a rare sight in the stern Alpha King. For years, he had struggled to understand his daughter, to protect her, while giving her freedom. Now he realized that she had needed more than protection. She had needed to be seen, truly seen. Kale stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty," he said aloud. "She taught me courage as well. Her silence is not weakness, but power." Varian studied him, his pride and fear warring within. Finally, he nodded. "Then let it be known," he said. "The princess has awakened, and she has chosen her path. Let none challenge her strength or her choices." In the following days, the palace transformed. Courtiers and guards adjusted to a new reality. Lyra walked openly, her steps confident, her eyes bright. She signed and spoke, blending words and gestures in a way that made her presence luminous. Kale remained by her side, not as a visitor or outsider, but as a partner, equal in courage and devotion. And in their private moments, they shared small, quiet gestures of love, fingers entwined in secret signs, smiles exchanged in the warmth of the fading frost, hands brushing in the garden where they had first truly seen each other. Their bond was more than romance. It was a shared strength, a defiance of fear and expectation, and a promise that they would face the world together. King Varian, once rigid and unyielding, learned to accept not only Kale but the truth of his daughter's power. He discovered humility, respect, and the understanding that authority was not the same as control. The lessons of silence, trust, and courage had taught him as much as they had taught Lyra. The kingdom, too, began to change. Arendor, long held by fear of the cold and the curse, now felt the warmth of hope. People spoke of the silent princess who had awakened, who had faced darkness with courage, and who had brought light and balance back to the land. Kale's name was no longer whispered with suspicion, but with admiration, for he had stood with her, unwavering. And though the shadow had been defeated, Lyra and Kale knew the world was never truly free from ancient forces. The curse had been broken, but the old magic lingered in the forests, in the mountains, and in the whispers of the wind. They could not be careless. They could only be ready. Together. That night, as snow fell softly over the castle, Lyra and Kale stood at the edge of the tower once more. She raised her hands, forming a sign that spoke of the deepest truth she had discovered. "Stay," Kale smiled, answering with his own hands. "Always." For the first time, Lyra spoke aloud, a word beyond whispers. "Stay." The sound was soft but unwavering, echoing through the tower and over the frozen lands. It was a declaration of love, trust, and courage, a new beginning for her, for Kale, and for Arendor. The kingdom had been changed forever. The silent princess had found her voice. The Omega had found his place. And the Alpha King had discovered humility. Together, they had faced darkness, stood against fear, and proven that courage and love could overcome even the oldest magic. And yet, beyond the castle walls, the wind carried a faint echo, a reminder that the world was vast, the shadows patient, and the magic eternal. Lyra's journey had reached a moment of triumph, but life, love, and the mysteries of the kingdom would always hold new challenges. But for now, the princess was seen, the Omega was present, and the kingdom was alive with the quiet, powerful hum of hope. And in that frozen northern land, where silence once reigned, a new voice had begun to sing.